G'day and welcome to Footy Rants. I've been wanting to do this for a little while, but now that I'm not really involved with any club with a strength and conditioning background anymore, I thought what better way to sort of fill that void than talking a little bit of Rugby League, a little bit of NRL, and at times maybe even a bit of Queensland Cup, just because obviously, coming from that background as well, and you can see you're wearing a Wyndham shirt here, still got a vested interest in that competition very much so. So sort of diving into recap round 6. I know we're a little bit late. This is the first one that I've done, but recapping round 6, we had the Bronx and Roosters back on Thursday night. I think, to be perfectly fair, it was probably that win that the Broncos deserved. Now, I'm not a Bronx fan by any means. I'm actually a Cowboys fan, so be prepared for some one-eyed Cowboys fan feedback later on. But yeah, I thought it was the win that the Broncos deserved. Having come into this round under a fair bit of pressure from their last couple of losses, especially from their disappointing loss against Canterbury last week. But in saying that, it was their biggest loss of the year, and it was 3 points. They win those other 3 clutch matches, and all of a sudden everyone's getting a rap on how good a finish the Broncos are. But ultimately they didn't, and that's why they've been getting the rousing that they have been copping. A few people that I thought stood up. I thought David Mead was really good on debut for the Bronx. Obviously, spending some time with Wyndham in the opening 5 rounds, he sort of paid his dues and got his opportunity with the injury to Corey Oates, and I thought he fucking really stood up. Some of his first touch was amazing. Nearly come up with a line break straight off the bat, and ultimately it was those sort of carries that ended up being the telling tale. Overall in the match, the line breaks, that was ultimately what killed him. Just having a look at a few stats here, possession ended up 57 to 43% in favour of the Bronx. Line breaks 11-5, offloads this one here 15 to 9, and with the Bronx completing at 88%. It ultimately come down to the Roosters killing themselves. You see here they missed 14 more tackles, gave away 5 more errors and 6 more penalties. So you clean some of those things up, and I guarantee you it's not a 32-8 scoreline, that's for sure. But unfortunately a few boys, like Sean Kenny Dowles had a bit of a stinker. Not sure what's going on with Sean at the moment, but he seems to be consistently fucking coming up with that error coming out of his own end. And we've seen too, Latrell Mitchell end up getting hooked with 10 minutes to go. He wasn't too happy, understandably, but at the same time, I think he's got to realise as a young player, that happens to everyone throughout their career. They're always going to go through a purple patch, and the fact that he's at the very, very start of his own, no doubt there is a whole new multitude of pressures that comes with being a professional athlete in the modern game. But at the same time, if this is me talking to him one-on-one, I'm saying just chill out, man. There's always a next week. Well, there's at least another 18 to 20 odd next weeks left for this year anyway. Ultimately, I thought the Bronx just did the fundamentals right and got the rewards that they deserved. Ultimately, the 4 teams that they played prior to, 5 teams they played prior to, didn't give away those little fundamental errors, and that's why the scorelines were a lot closer. So, yeah, I thought it was a just reward for a team that has probably been playing better than what results sort of speak for at the moment. And as for the Roosters, I don't think it's anywhere near alarm bells. They've showed throughout the first portion of the competition that they're more than capable of being a top 4 side, especially with the addition of Luke Keary into their lineup now. I think he's transitioned from the Bunnies extremely, extremely well. And just the way that his support play, I think, has been a big thing for that team moving forward, and probably something that they have lacked in the past, with Hastings and stuff like that. I would probably like to see Connor Watson injected into the game a little bit more. I know his time has been limited, but I think he's definitely a player of the future. I know in my experience with the Storm 20s last year, he played in all 3 games that we played against the Roosters in, and it was fucking diabolical. You couldn't contain him. He was way too good at that standard of footy. So moving forward, I think the Bronx coming into absolutely subdued Titans team this week should look to kick on, and I think should win well. The second game, so the first Friday night game for round 6 was the Knights and Dogs. It's the first time in, I think it was something like 9 years or something that a Friday night game had been in Newcastle, if I've got that stat right. So yeah, it's not too often that you see nighttime footy played in Newcastle. They're a big Sunday arvo club, but I think it was just that one game that got away, to be honest. They were in it for a fair portion of time, and that try to Brenko lead just before half time, I think it really got in their head. I think it really got to them. And also, I guess the big plus for the Dogs was when Matt Frawley come on. He's really stood up since debuting last week, and it's evident that his short kicking game is far and above superior to a Josh Reynolds and a Moses Mbai. And he needs to stay there. In my opinion, he stays there. Potentially Michael Leacher goes back to the bench, and I'd be playing Reynolds at 9. If I'm the coach of the Bulldogs, if I'm Des Hasler, Reynolds is a 9 for me. As much criticism as the bloke cops, and I don't think he is a genuine 6. The one attribute that he carries for me, if I'm someone that's looking to pick that team, is he gives a fucking shit. He actually cares about the club. There's pride in that jersey, and there's pride in the performance of the team week in, week out. He's an absolute competitor, and this is coming from a die-hard Queensland supporter. I hate it when he pulls that Sky jersey on, because I know he's a fucking little turd. So if I'm him, I'm getting him in the middle, getting him to roll the people up, much like Ennis did when he was at the Dogs before he moved to Cronulla. So that's one move that I would really like to see happen. I think it's almost a waste of an interchange trying to inject Frawley into the game later when he's going to bring so much value straight off the bat with that short kicking game. You saw how much, and not only that, like he scored that try and he set up another. So I know you can't automatically assume that that's going to happen week in, week out, but I can't see why you wouldn't give him the opportunity to prove so. Another person I thought that really brought great energy into an already strong Dogs forward pack was Adam Elliott. I thought he came on, he forced an error early, got stuck right into Brock Lamb, and yeah, I think he really helped accentuate that turn of momentum in that second half for the Dogs, and it was really good to see. A bit of a shining light, I guess, for the Knights in a losing team was Dane Gagai. He definitely didn't do himself any disfavour in getting another Origin call-up for the 2017 series. His carries were immensely strong, and just his ability to know when to shoot in off his edge and try and make those reads on the Bulldogs' attack, I thought were really good. But again, I guess it's just a case of a shining light and a bit of a dwindling team. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know they're definitely trying and they're putting up, or they're getting the results, I guess, that they were striving towards last year, and they are developing. And to a certain extent, I guess they're ahead of where we would have expected to see them come this time of the year. But I guess where it goes each way. I thought that Sione Matautia try right at the end, I thought it should have been blown. It sort of shits me when we go up to the bunker and we're checking for these, whether it be like a double movement or, like grounding the ball. You replay any try in slow-mo and you could start to question yourself about degrees of separation in grounding a football. Like, it's just a change in pressure on the ball. And if you watch that real time, just the sheer effort. I mean, I know it's not AFL, we don't give cunts points just for trying. You've actually got to prove the point. But at the same time, when you watch that in full speed, the fact that Sione Matautia was able to get himself in between those two Canterbury defenders and still get down on the ball, like, real time for me, that's a try every day of the week. And that potentially changes the result of the game. But, coming back full circle, I thought the Dogs, once Frawley came onto the field, they were the better team and they probably did deserve that result. And, the fact that pressure valve was released after that no try, they went the full length and sealed the game was fairly evident of that. And without without any sort of really standout forwards for the Knights, I think they'll continue to struggle long term. You know, you could see it there, competitive in that first half, but then they just sort of lose their legs towards the back end of the game. Whilst they are developing, you know, someone like Starling, he's just not an out-and-out starting NRL front rower. He's not going to win you a comp, put it that way. Yeah, so unfortunate for the Knights, but again, you know, potentially some momentum now building for the Dogs going back to back for the first time this year. And the second game for Friday night, what an entertaining game. Penrith and the Rabbits. Obviously Penrith missing those 3 key players due to a breach of drinking code, and I thought it was a really, really good move from Anthony Griffin to stand up and you know, put his foot down and say this isn't culturally acceptable at our club. It's something that he won't stand for, and if that comes at a cost of 2 points, so be it. Ultimately it did, but at the same time I think it shows what great depth Penrith has. You know, seeing someone like Michael Oldfield just come and do a job, you know, whilst he threw that fucking ridiculous pass to Dylan Edwards early on in the game, which nearly cost him points. Yeah, I thought once he found his feet and, you know, Malachi Watine-Zelezniak came on and did a great job. Yeah, it was a thoroughly entertaining game. Both teams went back and forward. The stats pretty much read just about the same across the park. You know, Burgess was very, very strong again up front for the Bunnies, and ultimately I think it just came down to opportunities. Those who took those opportunities. You couldn't say that Penrith didn't have the opportunities to win. The kicking game of Nathan Cleary is absolutely phenomenal. Seeing some of those bombs and continue to play at it. You know, it's one thing to know what's coming as an opposition defensive team, but it's another to stop it. So yeah, hats off to the kid. You know, he's only 20 odd games deep in his NRL career, and he's playing like a seasoned veteran. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It was probably my favourite game of the round, to be honest. And I think Adam Reynolds just showed his class in the end. And whilst I thought it was a bit of a nufty penalty, it's a bit of a grey area at the moment. I think the way the referees are adjudicating on this. Tackling the catcher in the air, and a lot of it's dictated by, you know, what your center's doing when he's running that block for the winger or the fullback. Yeah, it's a real grey area, and I thought I'm pretty sure it was Leilani Latu who went up for that ball and ended up getting penalised. He had eyes for the ball, and as far as I'm aware, that's the reasoning around that rule, that is, as long as you're competing for contesting the ball, it's fair play. Much like, you know, you're not allowed to out and out push someone off the ball, but if you sort of push them out of the way whilst competing for the ball, you know, sort of shouldering and stuff like that, it's sort of part of the game. So, you know, ultimately that was a massive momentum shifter, but to execute that set the way it did, you know, you can't script it much better as far as getting those meters up the middle to set up for your halfback like that. And we all know how deadly Reynolds' kicking game is, you know, in all aspects: goal kicking, field goals, general play. He's going to make you pay, and he ultimately did. And I think that'll fill them with a little bit of confidence. I thought the 20-6 scoreline with the Cowboys last week was pretty not quite reflective. I thought they were a little bit better than that. So yeah, it was good to see them. Good to see them get a result and get their campaign underway with a bit more momentum. Moving into the first game on Saturday, Manly versus the Dragons. Both teams coming off 3 wins in a row. It was definitely the biggest 50-50 of the round. It was probably one that was really going to spur some more momentum on for a team, because obviously one was going to go 4 in a row. And to be honest, I thought whoever the loser was going to probably play him out of a little bit of form, much like we've seen with the Roosters over the last fortnight. So yeah, Manly fans, I think you could be in for a bit of a rough fortnight if you continue to toss up that rot. You know, a team like the Dragons, playing in the form that they are at the moment, to come over to Brookvale and put on a performance like that. They just came out of the blocks way too hard. Ewan Aitken just showed, what a talent he's going to be for New South Wales in the future and for Australia, I believe. Just the size of the kid and the fact that, he's not overly tall, but he's just got that power, He's almost like, I guess, the physique that Josh Dugan wish he fucking had. Super explosive, aggressive, but at the same time, I guess he had to learn a little bit in defence. I mean, George Defua made him look a little bit stupid sometimes, but I guess that's just out and out power. When you're seeing a big boy like that just run over the top of people as big as you and Aiken, it just shows you the quality of the NRL, and what athletes this game's fucking producing at the moment is absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, there's not really much to break down in this Manly Dragons game. It was just a real clinical effort. I guess the biggest thing to come out of it ultimately was that decision in the first 5 minutes when Nightingale pulls Cherry Evans off the ball. I mean, I've seen a little bit on social media, people saying, well, it was DCE's own fucking fault. He was sort of being the carry-on and wanted to instigate it and this, that and the other. And now I didn't see the views sort of leading into it as to whether that was true or not and whether DCE did instigate it. But regardless of whether he gives him a shove, like once Cherry Evans is starting to make a play for that ball, if you collar someone and pull them off the ball, that's a professional foul. Like, you just can't do that. He had no opportunity to go and get that ball, and the fact that he was able to keep his cool when he went and spoke to Gavin Badger after that was nothing short of admirable. But at the same time, you had to feel for the bloke, and I don't know why, but during the kicking games, Manly didn't look to get the ball out too much in that first half, and I think that really, really cost them. And they just never really got their energy back after all that flow, and even after the Dragons went bang, bang, bang and led 16-0 early, they just didn't seem to recover. I thought they were definitely not out of the game by half-time, and obviously responded in the right way, but yeah, I think that really, really hurt them early as far as gas went for their middle, and they really, really took control of the ruck, the Dragons. Boys like Jack DeBell and even Frizzell on the edge were just super damaging, and the damage was done. So it will be interesting to see what happens with Manly now, whether they can get straight back on the winner's bus, and what happens with the Dragons now moving forward, whether they can keep capitalising on this month of momentum. Who would have thought Dragons leading the ladder, especially after, first couple of rounds we're talking about McGregor getting the sack and potentially Hasler moving there, and then all of a sudden there's pressure on Hasler, and then all of a sudden he gets re-signed with the Dogs. Interesting stuff, and I guess results speak. That's ultimately what a club's after. They just want wins. It's a big business. To the second game of Super Saturday was the Titans and Raiders. Yeah, look, you got to really, really feel for the Gold Coast in this situation. Obviously, down to the bones of their arse as far as of players is concerned. Still got Peets and McQueen on the sidelines amongst a host of other players. And they were just simply outclassed. You look at some of the defensive efforts there on the Titans' left-hand defence, and I mean, yes, Jordan Rapana and BJ Leilua, an absolute powerhouse combination, and are starting to find their groove much like they did in last season. But at the same time, we make the contrast back to Penrith and the depth that they've got, and the fact that they left out those big names and were still able to be super, super competitive. I think it just goes to show where the Titans are lacking a little bit of depth. Whilst the Raiders did play really well, I thought their shape was really, really strong. You got to defend it. It's a professional sport. Whatever bodies you're putting in to replace those injured players need to be up to the standard, or at least close enough to where you're not walking out and getting beaten 42-16 in front of your home crowd. Even back onto the other edge, the effort of Ash Taylor on Jack Whiten. I think he can be forgiven if it's a big edge back rower or a big front rower looking to get at his inside, outside shoulder, whatever it may be. But a fullback, and I know Jack Whiten's not small, but he's not massive either. And I thought his effort on White was really, really poor. And then even just the tie-in off that right edge after that, it was telltale that communication isn't at the forefront of that club, and there's not a lot of trust. But at the same time, like in little patches, their push was really good. But I think that try to Taylor at the start of the second half, that was built around, Lawton getting plenty of push up the ruck, but then also LG and Taylor pushing like they should be as good halves. But at the same time, where are the big bodies that are helping support the talent that you've got in those halves? They can only work with so much. Especially when you've got players still like Hurrell playing out there. Ryan James, great offload. So, yeah, there's still plenty of talent out on that field. So I don't think a 42-16 scoreline reflects what that team's capable of. It will be very, very interesting to see how they go on the drive up the highway to Suncorp this Friday. And now, the game that I don't really want to discuss as a Cowboys fan. Cowboys versus Tigers. They've always seemed to be that bogey team, and it was up to Ivan Cleary to see where he was going to be at with his first hit out as coach for the Tigers. And ultimately, it was a fantastic performance. No excuses at all for the Cowboys. I mean, we look at Granville being absent. We look at Coote being absent. And yes, that's half your spine. But at the end of the day, again, making no excuses, as I didn't allow the Titans to make any excuses. There was still enough talent on that football field to win that game. The amount of possession that they had in that second half, there was no reason why they couldn't. They started strong in that second half. They scored early, did what they need to do. And, even up until, 10 minutes to go, they still probably looked like they were going to roll over the top of them, like it was just going to happen. But I think maybe that's the mindset that they started to adopt after a while. That, repeat, and eventually we'll get some points. And it just didn't. They just didn't hold the ball well enough when they were. And I thought they got really, really clunky. A lot of their timing was off on their big plays to their edges. It was really, really disappointing to watch as a Cowboys supporter. The fact that we started so slow, but more so the fact that when we did have the opportunities to take the game by the balls and get the 2 points, which we expected to get against a team like the Tigers, and going through everything that they've been going through, I really thought that it was a game that needed to be won. And not to mention now we've got the injury to JT. It'll be very, very interesting to see what happens there. I haven't personally heard any more news on that. All I'm hearing is calf. I've seen a lot of shit going around now, Origin debacle and this, that and the other, but, we've still got about 7.5 weeks till Origin now anyway, and even if it's, a complete tear, which, potentially it might be the way he limped off, and the fact that he had to get carried up into the tunnel, tells me that it may be a bit worse than Lachlan Coote's first injury against the Broncos earlier in the year. But, yeah, even still, I would still like to think that he'll be right for Origin 1. If at worst, Origin 2, that's 10.5 weeks away. So the fact that these guys get the best care in the world and they've got all the time to put into rehab, if that is the injury that it is, that's his sole focus for the next 10.5 weeks. I can't see it being an issue. But yeah, I guess getting back towards the game, Cohen Hess again, what a revelation. Will he play Origin? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think there's a fair possibility that he be in the squad, that he will at least get given the opportunity to surround himself with those sort of people and learn even more from those blokes that he plays week in, week out with in Clubland. But whether he gets a start off that bench for game 1, I would almost like to say I hope he doesn't. just simply based on the fact of time and experience. And I know, rep teams should be picked off form and rah, 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 but if we've seen anything that is based off experience, it's Origin football. Ultimately, it's not really a rep team. Like, you're not picking your best club players. You're picking the best who have adapted to that type of game. Like, it's a completely different beast, as we see. And it continues to develop year after year. So, yeah, it's a really, really interesting concept. But, I wouldn't pick him early. I would leave him for the time being and go with someone a little bit more experienced. Just simply based on game one. We see the figures. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's weighted quite favourably to the team. Whoever wins game one generally wins the series. So based off that, that's basically why I wouldn't pick Cohen Hess. But the Tigers. Well, they stood up, and I think they showed a little bit of cunt, and they just wanted it more. They were just competitive. I thought they defended their line very, very stoutly in that second half, and just weren't afraid to put it up to the forwards. I mean, whilst Taumalolo, I thought still played outstanding, Cohen Hess still played outstanding. Obviously, they just did enough, and sometimes that's all you need to do in the game of rugby league. You just need to want it more than the opposition, and I think they definitely already show that they're willing to have a crack for Ivan Cleary, and whatever he said to certain players, whether the big four or whatever end up departing, it is what it is. And I think, much like someone like an Anthony Griffin or a Craig Bellamy trying to instill those values early, I think that's simply what Ivan Cleary has done. Well, it's what it appears to be. We soon will see whether it was a one-off and simply a bit of hype around that, and whether it will be consistent, we'll see in the non-too-distant future. Moving on to our last couple of games. So Sunday, all the way out in New Zealand, we had the Warriors and the Eels, and wow, it was Kieran Foran. What else do you say? Kieran Foran has added limbs to certain Warriors players out there, and he absolutely dictated terms. I think it's very, very evident that he's taken a lot of pressure out of Sean Johnson now, and Sean's able to play, inject himself when he needs or feels he needs to be injected. He doesn't feel like he's carrying the weight of that whole team on his shoulders anymore. And I think that Para were basically just upset at the fact that Kieran Foran wasn't wearing a Parramatta jersey. Some of the game management decisions by the halves in Norman and Gutherson at times, they're down on the scoreboard entering the last 15-20 minutes of the game, and they're finding touch instead of keeping the ball in play. Absolutely puzzled me at times. But ultimately, it was just that control of the New Zealand halves that were able to move forward, and I think they were missing a little bit of zing with Bevan French being out, the Parramatta side, and hopefully he's back as soon as possible. But from what I'm hearing, we're looking at 3 to 4 weeks, so they'll definitely miss his flair at the back. And let's hope. I really, really hope that the Warriors now can find a little bit of form and play to the potential that everyone not only expects them, but genuinely wants them to play at. On paper, every year they look phenomenal, and you just want them to do well. Not only because it's good for the game, but it's good for their fans. Like, their fans are so loyal. The fact that they're an international side. I, as a fan of the game, hope that they get on a bit of a run now, and I'd love to see them make the top 8 and really shake the pot. But whether they can hold that consistency, you'd like to think that under the reign of Kearney, who from all reports seems like a really, really good coach, continues to do so. And the final game between the Storm and the Sharks was the grand final rematch from last year, of course, and no love lost in what was some pretty treacherous conditions down in Melbourne, pretty standard. Neither side really gave an inch, and you can tell it meant a lot to both teams, and they were definitely using this as a measuring stick to where they were a quarter of the way through the competition. And it was great to see the fierce competitive nature, especially during the first high shot in that first 20 minutes from Maloney on Slater, and everyone sort of coming in there. I'm not sure if there was really a penalty involved in it. I guess you have to when there's a bit of contact that comes up on the head, but I guess it evened itself out. But yeah, it was just a slugfest, and it was great to see two forward packs go toe to toe and understand the conditions for what they were. But also, I thought there was a few times where both teams, didn't really play to conditions, and that's ultimately what cost the Storm. Just coming up with unforced errors in that sort of weather coming out of your own end, and Gerard Beale scores straight in that corner. 10 minutes to go, they're the clutch plays. You need to be willing to tuck it under your arm and really elicit those Melbourne Storm traits of just sticking to the structure and getting the job done, and just having faith that those people around you know their role because they believe that you know your role. And if you're not living up to that standard, that's when shit's going to go south, and that's ultimately what happened. Taking nothing away from Cronulla, I think it really showed almost where you can sort of buy into like the narrative of a game, being a grand final rematch, and seeing Jimmy Maloney and Cronk just fucking at each other's throats leading into halftime was awesome. And it's something that we want to promote, the fact that game's being played in Melbourne, and Melbourne public seeing that, and they're like, oh wow, this means something to them. The Storm have always had a pretty good following, but I think it can always be better, and it should always be better. They're a fantastic organisation, and I believe that the future coming through for that club, it's definitely not going to let that fan base down in the not too distant future either. So yeah, that's basically the quick rundown. I don't by any means want to come across as some sort of expert or anything like that. Moving forward, I'd love to try and get some guests on this, whether they be, just weekend punters like myself, or some guys that I know within my social circle that still play, whether it be a reserve grade or an under-20s level. I'd love to keep growing that. Perhaps get some sort of video replay footage or something of the like, but otherwise, yeah, I think I'll just start off just with like one a week, doing a bit of a recap, and if I feel the need to throw anything more your way. But yeah, feel free to throw some comments down the bottom. Perhaps the way you viewed certain games, certain calls. I by no means went into any great depth in any games. So if there's anything that you want to bring forth to the table, ask any questions, generate any conversation. Ultimately, I want this to be a platform where all of us rugby league supporters can come and get an opinion across, because I don't want this to be some sort of like media type thing where they're sort of constrained by what they can and can't say. Like this is a Facebook video, a YouTube video, wherever I decide to post it, probably both. So if we can get more opinions around it and some interaction around it, I think it's only gonna better the game. So whilst I want to keep it relatively fact based, like ultimately get your passions and your opinions across, guys. So yeah, if you've made it this far, I think we're almost 35 minutes in. So if you've made it this far, thank you very much for tuning in and watching. And I'll see you next week.